Tyranids! I've always had a soft spot in my heart for the Tyranids. I don't know why, because I really hate bugs in real life. But there you go, you got the Tyranids for Daemonic, Incursion, Warhammer 40,000, Battlesector. How do you play these guys? Now, there's generic tips in the description if you're not familiar, if you haven't watched any of these guide videos that I do actually have on the channel. So, basically the first thing you want to think about is, what units do I have to tank damage? Especially coming from skull cannons and soul grinders, because they're going to be shooting you from the back lines. And there's not really a lot you can do in melee about the matter, so you need things to tank, and that's why you have triple Tervigons. Massive amounts of armor, huge HP pool, especially when you consider the cost, which isn't that expensive. But the most powerful thing really is this heal ability that they've got. Honestly, the extra melee damage, not really that big of a deal, but 50 HP on the initial heal, and then at the start of the next turn you get an extra 50 HP, so it's a 100 HP heal, which only has a cooldown of 1, so you can use it every turn. And you can just spam it. It's very, very strong. You can have 3 Tervigons even when you're playing with cohesive armies, so you definitely want that, and you want to be using these guys to tank. Then, to add to your tanks, you have the Tyrannofex, so they have slightly more armor. And that's actually basically it. They cost less than the Tervigon, but that's because they're not a HQ unit, so they can only attack once. However, they do have the Acid Spray, which will one-shot... I think it one-shots Hellhounds, Fleshhounds. I always call them Hellhounds. It can definitely one-shot Bloodletters, and it has range too, so if you use this correctly, you can actually hit 3 enemies at once with this. So in theory, line it up correctly, your Tyrannofex can kill 3 squads of Bloodletters in a single attack. How cool is that? And they're very tanky, so you definitely want 2 of these. Honestly, given that you've got 3 Tervigons, and you've got 2 Hive Tyrants, which themselves are pretty damn tanky, and you've got 2 Tyrannofex, I don't think you need 3 Tyrannofex. I think you've got enough tankiness there. So let's talk about the Hive Tyrants. Hive Tyrants are the most important thing here for this entire build. They're really tanky, but that's not their primary role. That's just a nice bonus. The primary thing that actually makes the Hive Tyrant so powerful is strategic adaptation. So you've got an AoE buff within 2 tiles. All nearby Tyranids get plus 10 ranged accuracy. Now, Synapse for the Tyranids already gives you accuracy bonuses. Synaptic Leader. All friendly units within 3 tiles get plus 10% accuracy and extra evasion and extra momentum gains. So you can get plus 10%, plus 10%, plus 10%, and then you get plus 10 ranged accuracy, so not percentage, but just a flat increase. If you combine the Synapse accuracy buff with the strategic adaptation range buff for the Hive Tyrant, your ranged units are going to be 100% accurate at crazy, crazy distances. And that's why the bulk of your army here, at the start, is going to consist of Warrior Broods with the Deathspitter upgrade, which is just a straight upgrade from the Devourers. For 15 power you might as well. Same number of attacks, but you do more damage, you've got more AP, and you've got longer range, and you've got higher base accuracy. So Deathspitters are just way better, and for the very small cost of 15, you want to get Deathspitters on every Warrior Brood that you can get. And in fact, that is actually part of the reason why I take a Warrior Prime, because if you try and do the maths with this build, if you lose the Warrior Prime and you bring an extra 2 Warriors, then you are unable to get the Deathspitters on the Warriors, and I don't want to use my precious cap on the Warriors on Devourer Warriors. I want to use it on Deathspitters, so I'll be bringing Warriors in as reinforcements. But we're moving ahead of ourselves slightly there. As part of the ranged core, you've also got the Hive Guard. So the Hive Guard are nice because they're a little bit tankier than the Warriors, and their guns are a little bit better at long range. Range 7 on the Hive Guard, whereas it's range 6 on the Deathspitters. And they ignore partial cover penalties, which is just beautiful when you're fighting a lot of Bloodletters that are half in cover, covered by other things. These guys are amazing. Great unit, you want to max out on them right at the start. So then you've got Warrior Primes. Why do you have Warrior Primes? Well, well, you actually don't have warrior primes, you've only got one. Basically, there's not really anything else that's particularly good to purchase. That's more or less it. You could maybe bring a form back Carnifex, but the warrior prime, he works out for the point value. You can see I'm 10 points off here. He just does insane amounts of melee damage. You can see here he does 2 attacks per AP. He has 2 AP because he's a HQ unit, and he's got splash damage, he's got high armor piercing, he's got natural killer, so when he kills a model, there's a 75% chance this will proc, and then he gets an extra attack and 50% more melee damage. So, look, if anything does manage to sneak past your firing lines and get into melee, this guy can rip them up in just very quickly. He's a little bit squishy. You're not going to send him 1v1 against a Bloodthirster, because the Bloodthirster will turn around and beat him up, but the DPS on the Warrior Prime is very nice, and he is an extra source of synapse, which doesn't hurt. So that is most of what the build is. The Hive Tyrants themselves will be spending most of their time just shooting their heavy venom cannon, which again has very long ranged, and they're just going to be shooting at the enemy artillery. So skull cannons and soul grinders are going to be the key targets for these, as well as your Hive Guard, which are really good at long ranged. Then you can chop up any chaff that gets through with your Tervigons and their double splash damage melee attack, and your warriors are pretty much good against all targets, to be honest. Obviously Tyrannofex, they are going to be dealing with chaff mostly with their acid spray. Now when you've got Tervigons, you also get access to your Termagant spawns, so you can actually spawn, just from having these free Tervigons, you can spawn 9 squads of Termagants. Termagants are actually really damn good. When you've got the synapse accuracy buff and you've got the strategic adaptation accuracy buff, these Termagants are going to be basically 100% accurate all the time, as long as they're firing at optimal range. Then you add in swarm tactics to get an extra 35% range damage every time another squad of Termagants is nearby. Things get pretty crazy. You have a blob of 5 Termagants, and all of those Termagants will be doing 140% extra damage with perfect accuracy. They actually are quite insane. Let me just show you one thing about the Termagants, however, because what you'll be doing with Termagants, you can get the 9 basic Termagants which have flesh borers, but when it comes to reinforcements, you actually do want to be calling in a lot of Termagants, but you always want them to have the Devourers. So Devourers compared to Flesh Borers are basically just a straight upgrade. You'll see here, attacks 3 for the Flesh Borers, attacks 6 for the Devourers. The Flesh Borers do slightly more damage, but they don't have as much armor piercing, and the extra attacks on the Devourers actually mean they do more damage in total. The Devourers also have higher range. And then the big disadvantage of the Devourers is that it's -10 in accuracy, but you make up for that with strategic adaptation and your synapse. Spine Fists, on the other hand, are a close-ranged tool, but you don't want to be in range 1, basically, so forget the Spine Fists, they're not really important. So when it comes to reinforcements, you're going to be calling in additional warriors with deathspitters until you max out on them, which I believe is 6 for Cohesion. Yes. And that's part of the reason why you bring the Warrior Prime in the first place. Oh, what have I done here? I've got 1 extra warrior. And now 2 of these have Devourers. So yeah, you want to be bringing in warriors and Termagants for your reinforcements initially. Eventually you will max out the Termagants, and you're going to have ungodly amounts of them. You might actually lose a couple of Termagant squads because skull cannons can one-shot Termagants, which is depressing, but it is what it is. But honestly, with the 250 reinforcements and the fact that Devourer Termagants are 30 and what is it, an extra 10 for Devourer? Yeah, so they cost 40. Now, another reason why you want no Termagants in this starting army here, and also you want to be bringing the Warrior Prime and not the Warriors, is because Termagants are so cheap, only costing 40. You've got to remember, when you bring in reinforcements, you can only bring in 4 requisitions at a time. So even if you brought in 4 upgraded Termagants, that is only 160 points, so you're going to have excess. Likewise here, you can see, even though I've got 16 out of 20 units, I am actually there on my point total. So I don't really feel like there's too much value in bringing the Termagants in this starting army. Trust me, you don't need the DPS of the Termagants for the first couple of waves. Later on, you kind of do, just to deal with chaff spam. But early on, you've got perfectly sufficient amount of range damage here with your Hive Guard and your warriors. I guess if you don't have the DLC for Hive Guard, you could bring Termagants early on. And if you don't have the DLC for the Hive Guard, that is a shame because these guys are definitely very powerful. But you could probably swap these guys out for 6 warriors at the start, a bunch of Termagants, and then for reinforcements, instead of bringing in warriors and Termagants, just bring in Thornback Carnifexes. The Thornback Carnifex, it's a nice, versatile tool. You can actually give it deathspitters, which you probably should, because again, it's just a straight upgrade. Way more damage, higher AP, and longer range. So they actually have a decent range attack, and they're somewhat tanky. I mean, they're tanky for their cost, I suppose, and they're okay in melee, so they're fine. They're alright. You can bring these guys in as reinforcements either way, but if you don't have the Hive Guard, just replace them with warriors at the start, plus Termagants, and then bring in Thornback Carnifex. If you go in with this build because you got the DLC, you want to focus on getting the last 2 remaining warriors with deathspitters, get all of the Termagants. I don't know how many you can get in total, I think it's about 8. And then after that, you can go for Gargoyles, which, you know, they're just flying Termagants basically. Actually, they've got 50% more HP, which is pretty cool, and more evasion. So Gargoyles are really good. You can go for Thornback Carnifex, and you can go for Gene Stealers. I actually don't know if Gene Stealers or Hormagaunts are better. They're both pretty damn good. The Gene Stealers are better if there's no Synapse. So when they spawn in as reinforcements, if they do get caught by anything, the Gene Stealers will perform better. But if you can get the Hormagaunts to the main army, then the Hormagaunts will perform better. But the other thing to consider is, Hormagaunts, just like Termagants, are super cheap, 35 points, and you can only call in 4 per reinforcement, so you might end up with excess points, in which case, just take the Gene Stealers anyway. As for other units, I don't think the Exocrine is particularly useful. You have such high range with your Hive Tyrants, your Warriors, and your Hive Guard, that using this cannon in order to try and take out enemy Skull Cannons or Soul Grinders doesn't feel worth it. And of course, the really powerful AoE blast that the Exocrine gets, you are limited to 2 ammunition per game, so you're not going to be using that, which makes it pretty bad. It's also really slow if you bring it in as reinforcements. It's very liable to getting chopped to pieces, so I do not recommend doing that. Trygon, I think, is kind of pointless. Its armor isn't as good as the Tervigon or the Tyrannofex, which is 9 armor. And it's got a little bit less HP. The thing with this guy is, you're mostly just a melee thing. So in that case, I feel like I'd rather just have the Tyrannofex, which can actually kill multiple units of Bloodletters in a single turn, whereas this probably can't even kill 1 with its melee attack. And this AoE blast, I mean, this is not going to one-shot Bloodletters either, so yeah, I don't like the Trygon, don't think it's very good. I would avoid it. Broodlord is pointless because you're not going to be bringing Gene Stealers in your main army, so this guy, yeah, he just doesn't really achieve anything. And I wouldn't even bring him in as reinforcements because he's just too expensive. It's better to just spam Gene Stealers, to be honest with you. The damage output from having lots of Gene Stealers is way better, and I feel like if you're bringing in melee units as reinforcements in the later game, you probably want damage. Venom Thropes, they're more to be used against ranged armies, because as you can see here, they've got the Spore Cloud ability that buffs their evasion and their ranged armor. But the Tyranids, they're not really that scary at range. They've got Skull Cannons and Soul Grinders, but honestly, you want them to not be shooting at your melee infantry anyway. And again, as usual, you don't really need melee infantry. The damage resistance debuff that they have is cool, but trust me, the level of damage that you do with the Tyranid ranged weapons, you can just get so many of them, you don't even need the damage resist debuffs, you just want more range damage. So that is the build for this one. Just like with the Necrons, I've actually got a full run through of all 8 waves playing this kind of build. So you can find the link to that in the description and in a pinned comment down below. Check it out if you want no commentary, full run through of this build in action. Otherwise, that is going to be all from your boy STD today. Thank you for listening, folks. Torpid signing out.